I'm going to give everybody like 30 to 45 more seconds just in case we have any last minute arrivals. Okay, everybody, I think we're up to probably as many participants as are going to arrive, but if anyone is a late arrival, they'll just be able to jump right in. Welcome, my name is Emily Helft. I'm the Director of Disability Services here at the University of Richmond, and I'll just quickly allow Julia to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. We're so happy to do this tonight, and I am Julia Kelly, Coordinator of Disability Services at U of R.
Great. Thanks, Julia. So we thought that it might be nice just to get everyone used to using the Q&A feature. That is the method of asking questions. We can't use the chat during this presentation. We need for our participants to use the Q&A feature, which you'll see down in the bottom bar. So if everyone would like to and you feel comfortable, if you'd like to just drop into the Q&A where you're from or where you are zooming in from, Julia will be able to call some of those out for us.
All right, we have Suzanne from Cincinnati, Ohio.
That's exciting. Welcome. Anybody else want to drop in there where you're from or where you're zooming from if they're different?
Welcome, Janine from Irvington, New York with Joe. And we have
also from New York, so that is exciting. I'm much further upstate near Albany, but in New York.
And welcome, Isabella from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm not from there, so I can't say Philly. I haven't earned it.
Okay, great. So I'll just go ahead and kind of switch gears just to make sure everybody is in the right place. This is the presentation on disability services here at the University of Richmond. So just in case you popped into the wrong presentation, my feelings won't be hurt if you leave, but just wanted to set the stage to make sure everybody was in the right place. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in just a second. I'm going to be going over just an overview PowerPoint. If you have questions that are coming up throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. Julia might be able to address some of those directly by typing, and if there are any that it sounds like would be helpful to address at the end in video format, I can do that as well. And we'll also just leave some time at the end specifically for Q&A related things. That being said, we'll also talk about at the end some different methods of communication you can use with disability services, because we do understand that some questions are a little bit more private and a little bit more sensitive. So we will definitely have other options for you guys if you're not comfortable asking those directly in the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. And just really quickly, Julia, is that showing properly?
Yes, it looks perfect.
Lovely. Okay, so welcome everyone. Julie and I already introduced ourselves, but I always think it's nice to just put a name with a face. So we have introduced each other on camera, but we basically make up disability services here at the University of Richmond. We recently underwent a bit of an organizational restructure, and now disability services is a one-stop shop for all things student accommodation related at the university. So I oversee most of the accommodations review, and Julia is an amazing asset to the office that helps with all kinds of administrative support and all of the other things that go along in the background for running an office like this. So as a very brief overview, so what exactly is disability services? In the college setting, what does that mean? So disability services is an office that is specifically devoted to accessibility and disability advocacy here on campus. So the way we are structured, we are specifically a student support office. Different universities do also do employment sometimes in this office. My office is specifically devoted to student support. So in real life, like what does that actually mean? So the kind of three main key takeaways for what our office does is that we provide equitable opportunity and access to all things Richmond as far as the student experience. So a lot of people immediately think of academic accommodations, and we definitely do that. But that also expands to all other things Richmond, like housing, dining, parking, events, all of those things. If you are a student, we are the office that you talk to about those things. We also provide direct student support with dedicated staff through our office. And I'm really proud to say that we always do individualized one-on-one intake meetings, at least for academic accommodations at this point, for every student, so that we have the chance to get to know you and for you to get to know us. In addition to that, we also do educational outreach and programming. Our goal is to normalize disability and to bring awareness to the disability community. And we do that through all different kinds of things, whether it's faculty trainings, full campus events, guest speakers, all of those things. Those are the goals of this office. This year has been a little bit different as far as how we've been working towards those things, but hopefully we'll be moving towards a more in the after times, what we're kind of used to doing for those kinds of programs. And before I forget to mention this, I did need to put in a slide and I realized I forgot. I do intentionally switch back and forth between using identity first and person first language when I talk about the disability community, just to make sure that we're respecting all students that prefer one or the other. So that would be the difference between me saying a student with a disability versus a disabled student. So you'll hear me intentionally switching back and forth between that language in this presentation to make sure we're inclusive. So one of the kind of key stats that I like to tell students about here at Richmond is that 1 in 10 of our spiders is registered with my office. The majority of that is for academic accommodations, but we also do all of those other kinds of accommodations that I mentioned. And I think that this stat really helps students to kind of put that into perspective, especially students that are a little bit more on the fence possibly about registering with the office. They might feel a little bit more private or unsure about moving forward with that process. Just keep in mind, 10%, 1 in 10 students is registered with my office. So as far as kind of how that reflects on campus and what that means for my office, to kind of put that in a different perspective, at Richmond, the average class size is 16 students. So statistically speaking, there's likely one other student in that average class size that is also registered with my office. So I just kind of like to put all of that in perspective for students. Another thing I'd like to highlight as a fact about our office is that we recognize that disability is a very broad term that applies to all different kinds of disabilities. And that includes invisible disabilities. So while we certainly support and serve students that have disabilities that might be a little bit more obvious, such as they might be a wheelchair user, they might be blind or vision impaired. We also work directly with students on more invisible disabilities, things like autism, learning disabilities, mental health diagnoses, including anxiety and depression, which we've certainly seen a spike in this past year, and ADHD as well. So we always like to be really upfront about the kinds of students that can register with our office. Despite all of the outreach that we do, we still hear from students in their junior and senior year that say things like, I wish I knew that my ADHD counted. So we are trying to really get the word out there that students that do identify with those diagnoses very likely might qualify for accommodations in my office. I also like to highlight that we do have a formal registration process, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But we make sure that we work continuously with students throughout their tenure here at the university. So from that registration process all the way going forward until you graduate, if you want to continue to be really involved and engaged with disability services, we are here to support you throughout that entire journey. So some helpful information to know. So what can you actually expect from working with a disability services office like mine? So one of the really important things that I like to highlight is that student confidentiality is incredibly important to us here at Richmond. And it's important everywhere, but we are particularly careful in terms of how we manage student records and how students disclose to other people on campus and how any of those kinds of communications work with anyone within our community. So what that means is that your records are very, very private. And another thing that a lot of students are concerned about, it's a question I get a lot, is, well, is this going to show in my transcript if I register with your office? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Disability status is very heavily protected. If you choose to disclose beyond that, that's totally fine. But we always start at the baseline of as confidential as possible, and then you can take it from there. We also emphasize a really student-driven experience. That's why we do one-on-one intake meetings. We want to make sure that each spider's voice is heard. And we really emphasize that each student is in control of their experience here at Richmond. Julie and I also strive for very, very timely and helpful responses for any outreach that we get from students. Right now, definitely our main method of communication and working with students is email, followed by Zoom, just because of the reality of what we are dealing with right now. But in the future, we are hoping to move back to a more face-to-face personalized office where students could also stop by. But if you prefer to do other kinds of communication, we strive to be as responsive as possible so that you can get answers and support quickly. So as far as that registration process that I alluded to earlier, it's essentially a three-step process. You would submit an application, and you can find that on our Disability Services webpage. It's an online form, and that's a chance for you, as in the student, to give us a bit of background information about why you're reaching out to the office, what your experiences have been like so far, any background information about your diagnosis and how it's impacted you. It's really the opportunity for you to describe in your own words what your experience has been like, and that just helps me to prepare for our intake meeting. The other piece that goes along with that is submitting some kind of documentation. So some kind of external verification of your diagnosis or any kind of condition. And we have a lot more information on our website about what kinds of documentation we would be looking for, but we do try to work as flexibly as possible with students when it comes to documentation. We essentially just need some information that helps us understand what barriers are in place so that we can determine what accommodations make the most sense. Once we get that information, if it is an academic accommodation that's being requested, you go through a one-on-one intake meeting with me. Right now they are done via Zoom, like I mentioned earlier. But in the future, those are something that we would also hope to offer in person. And that's a time for us to get to know each other, talk about what accommodations you would be approved for, talk about next steps, and all the things that come along with being approved for accommodations so that we can get all of your questions answered. If you are applying for other accommodations that aren't academic, such as housing or dining, that does go through a separate process that involves other campus partners. And I would just kind of keep you up to date on how that's going and any outcome decisions as far as those requests. So once you're registered, for some students, that's kind of the end of their interaction with us, and that's totally fine. Our feelings aren't hurt. That means the original plan we came up with is working. But if you do want to continue engaging with disability services, we are here in order to do that. So that might be different kinds of problem-solving meetings. We might help to connect you with other resources on campus, depending on what it is that you're telling us or disclosing to us. And then we can also make alterations and changes to accommodations This is not meant to be something that's set in stone. We understand that students evolve and that their needs also change and evolve over time. And we're here to kind of meet you wherever you're at as those things change, if they do change. It might mean that we need new or updated documentation. It might not. It just kind of is something that we would work through together as we just go through that process, kind of as more of a partnership to figure out how we can arrive at a solution for anything that's going on. So some other key takeaways and other important nuggets of information. And if you've been a little tuned out throughout this presentation or haven't 100% been paying attention, this is the part that I really, really want for you to pay attention to. So there are three major things that I do want to highlight when you are thinking forward to registering with our office. The first one is that college and high school are different. And I know that there's a part of you that's like, well, yeah, obviously they're different. But in terms of how disability services and accommodations work, they are quite different. One of the biggest pieces that I like to highlight about this is that whereas when you were in elementary, middle, and high school, a lot of things were going on in the background as far as your accommodations and your needs. Mom or dad or grandma or any other guardians might have been pretty heavily involved with the school, and the school was taking care of a lot of things for you. The laws and rules change when you get to the college setting. And the biggest key change is that you, the student, are now completely in charge of initiating everything that has to do with your accommodations. So what that means is when we have our intake meeting, that intake meeting is just supposed to be between me and you. It's a chance for you to start self-advocating for yourself and to start getting comfortable doing those things independently. It also means you are 100% in control of who you disclose to and when you do that. There are no requirements for disclosure, and I can certainly advise you on different approaches that you might want to take, but it's 100% up to you. And my the transcription at the bottom is kind of blocking on the bottom of my screen, but I think what that says is that, again, you are 100% in control of your accommodations experience. So it's all totally student driven. It's a really exciting change, but it is a bit of an adjustment for some students. The next thing, again, because these two settings are so different, is that I do like to give students a little bit of a heads up that the things that you're approved for as far as your accommodations might change from what you're used to in high school. For some students, that can be a little bit stressful, but we are here to help you make that transition. And I'm not highlighting this to make anyone worried or anxious about this process. I do just like to point out that the laws and the rules are a little bit different in the college setting. The really big change from K-12 into higher ed is that in K-12, students are guaranteed success, whereas in higher ed or the college setting, we make sure that you have equal access. And that's why some of your accommodations might end up changing or evolving in some way, just because it's a little bit of an adjustment in terms of how we approach that question and the different solutions that we can come up with depending on what concerns it is that you're dealing with. But again, that's why we consider each application completely independently from others. Every student is unique, and that's why we really engage in that interactive process individually with each student. The other and probably most important thing that I do really want to encourage you to do is to register now and not later. Even if you don't think you're going to use your accommodations, even if you're only doing it because mom and dad are telling you to, that's totally fine. Just go ahead and register. You are not required to use your accommodations in any way, shape, or form. But the reason that I really encourage students to do that is kind of twofold. The first is, while we try to process all applications as quickly as possible, it does take time, especially if it's a really busy time of the year. So we usually see a huge spike around midterms and then a huge spike right before finals. And when I have 30 students that all need a meeting at the last minute, sometimes the reality is that I can't meet with every student in time for final exams. So I just encourage you to go ahead, register, go through that process now. We'll have a plan in place and ready to go. If you end up needing it, great, it's ready. And if not, I would rather have a plan that you don't use than the other way around. The other reason it's really important is that accommodations are never retroactive. So what that means is we can't actually go back in time to make any changes or adjustments prior to you registering with the office and disclosing any of your accommodations to the people that are responsible for implementing them. So a professor or an instructor, for example. So that's why I always really like to encourage students to just go ahead and register. Summer is a great time to get everything done. I have plenty of time to meet with students. It will be over Zoom, but for a lot of students that are out of state and not local, that's probably the way that we would be doing it anyway. So again, if you don't remember anything else from this presentation, please remember to go ahead and initiate that registration process ASAP. I would so much rather you be registered and then end up not needing to use your accommodations than the other way around. Okay. And if you have any questions beyond that, we have tons of information on our website, particularly about documentation. We have some FAQs about different things. And of course, again, we'll be addressing some of those here, but we'll not be able to go super in depth for different things, whereas the website has a lot of really detailed information that you can peruse on your own time. Julie and I are also more than happy to work with students directly, whether it's via phone, email, Zoom meetings. That is what we are here for. You can go ahead and book any kind of meeting with me directly on our website. There's a button that says that you'd like to book a meeting with me, or of course you could email either me or Julia for the link to go ahead and get you on my calendar. We are more than happy to answer any questions or chat through any things if there's any uncertainty, or if you are already ready to go and you are ready to apply, we would just be getting you ready to go for that intake meeting. So I know that that was a fair amount of information to go through relatively quickly. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I'll get everything kind of closed out. Julia, were there any questions coming in the Q&A throughout that we might want to address as a group?
Yeah, we just got a great question that just popped through. Could an accommodation be a single room?
That would be considered a housing accommodation, and that is something that we do receive requests for and that we do approve. Particularly with housing accommodations, it's really important to get in any applications ASAP, just because the logistics involved with housing is a bit more complex. And there are some instances where you might be approved for an accommodation, but if it came in too late in the year and we logistically can't make it happen, you might be approved, but you wouldn't actually be able to start using it until next year, for example. That's just worst case scenario. But again, that's why I'm just encouraging students to apply ASAP. I will say that approving singles isn't particularly common, but we always look at each request individually, and that would be going to our housing accommodation committee, and we would consider each of those applications on its own individualized basis.
Does anyone else have any questions they would like to answer or ask, and we will answer?
Just give everyone a second in case you want to gather your thoughts and type it out. And again, in case anybody's kind of getting some information out there in the Q&A, if you do have questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in front of a group, which I totally understand, a lot of questions we get are a bit more sensitive. Again, you can definitely reach out to Julia or to me directly via email. All of our contact information is on our website. So if you would prefer to ask something in a little bit more confidence, we are more than happy to handle those questions as well.
And we just had another question pop through. What are the dining accommodations for dietary needs? Great question.
I was just thinking that Andy sent me that question ahead of time, and I was like, oh, I need to remember to address that. So we do also offer dining accommodations. Again, you would go through the standard application process. This year was particularly interesting just because of the way things were running on campus because of COVID, physical distancing and the things we needed to implement. We're not 100% sure what things are going to be looking like this year. So particularly with dining, I would encourage you to go ahead and apply. What could happen is that you would be referred to our campus registered dietitian, and she can work directly with students on meal planning, very careful meal prep. We have a separate section of D-Hall that is 100% devoted to complete gluten-free food prep. And that's something that hopefully when we get to the after times, we also do have very gluten-friendly options in our dining hall as well. Everything is very well marked. That's the same with other dining locations on campus. So some of the, not D-Hall kinds of things, grab and go, the different kind of more fun places that students like to go, they do also offer gluten-friendly options, and they would be labeled that way. And they're just labeled a little bit differently because that food isn't prepared in a 100% guaranteed gluten-free environment. So that's why they're labeled gluten-friendly. They don't contain gluten ingredients, but just because there is a tiny risk of cross-contamination, they are labeled a little bit differently. We do also offer a new dining option on campus, Organic Crush, which is in our new amazing wellness building. And they also have lots and lots of gluten-free options. About 90% of their menu is actually gluten-free. And you can look up all of that stuff if you want to go online and like check out menus and look at food. There's lots of things that you can see online.
And our next question is, do you need to make a new account to access Maxient in order to apply? And happy to share that the answer is no. We do utilize the single sign-on. So all you will need to do is register your University of Richmond account to get your NetID and password. And the link to do that is on the New Spiders Enrolled Student Checklist. And we have another question. Is a 504 in high school documentation required from a high school counselor to submit, or does the student submit? So sounds like a great question about what type of documentation is required.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's two layers to that question. One is about the type of documentation, and it also sounds a little bit like the other part of that question is who does it have to come from? Like, is it allowed to be submitted by me, the student? So a 504 plan is something that we would definitely consider as a part of the documentation process. What we really would prefer to see is more documentation that explains why you have the 504 plan. And that can be all different kinds of things. It might be a letter from a doctor. It could be some kind of evaluation. We try to be really flexible in terms of who that's coming from and where it's coming from. But we will definitely consider a history of accommodation demonstrated in a 504 plan in the process. As far as who submits it, you as a student are more than welcome to submit all of your documentation yourself. So the note doesn't necessarily have to come faxed from your doctor's office. We don't have to get an email from a school counselor at your school. You can secure all of those documents yourself. We assume that students are submitting things that are genuine, and that's why we don't require that they come from an external source, and you would just be able to submit those either as a part of your application, or you can upload it into the portal with a different link later on.
That's all we've got at the moment.
Great. Those are all really, really good questions. But yeah, if anyone has anything else that pops up later on, again, feel free to reach out. That is what we are here for. We are a 12-month office. We are open throughout the year, so we are here during the summertime, and we'd be more than happy to work with you. I think that we are all set.
You're most welcome, Monica and Janine. Thank you for attending. And Lynn.